Welcome to the Political Beast podcast for January 28th. It is 10:30 Central Time where I am. Same for our managing editor, Jonathan Deviney. How are you, Jonathan?
I'm good, Gabriel. Thanks for having me.
So it's 11:30. That means where Donald Trump finished about an hour ago his first joint speech before both houses of Congress, not the State of the Union, but his first opportunity to speak to both houses. And as we're going to discuss with each other and with our podcast listener, it was interesting. But we're going to get into why as we go. The way the podcast will run, and this will be one of the shortest, we just wanted to do this directly on the back of the joint speech. I'm going to let Jonathan give a quick rundown of just his gut reaction to the speech. I'll take my turn. And then he and I will go back and forth. I have no idea how many points he wants to touch on. I've got maybe 5 or 6. We'll hit those each real quick, and then we'll wrap up. Since he started with his rundown, I'll let him also start with the wrap-up, and then I'll close us out, and we'll all go home. Hopefully, those of you who didn't see or hear the speech will get enough information to feel like you did. Those of you who did will have some counterpoints to impressions that you might have gotten on your own. So here we go. Jonathan, take us away. Give us your quick overview of what you felt when you saw the speech.
This is actually kind of cheating, but I'm going to go ahead and borrow a page from what Charles Krauthammer said in his response. I think Mr. Krauthammer is a brave man, and he said that this is what should have been the president's inaugural address. Okay, and it really fit more in line with what we expected in that it was a very broad speech about, it was a populist speech, which was how he ran his campaign, and it spoke to all sectors of American society, whether it was on tax cuts or budget hawks for infrastructure, which needs to be rebuilt, the military, and even the parts that address specifically the needs of minorities and women. And I thought it was excellent that he opened up with the recognition of it being, albeit the last day, by Black History Month. It was a speech that he needed to give, and it's going to be tough now for the opposition party trying to, if this is the tone, the tenor going forward, it's going to be real tough to fight a whole lot of what he wants to get done.
My overview is that he said a lot that he said before, but that doesn't mean that it was wrong to say it again. And he did stretch out the hand of friendship to the Dems in an appropriate amount of times, I think. And what he said was important, which when you go before both houses, that's the primary criteria for whether or not it was a good speech, was it important? And I think it was. So take it away. Give us your first issue that you want to touch on. I'll counterpoint, and then I'll give you mine.
Well, I think that the biggest thing that it got said towards the end of the speech, and until it got said, I was sitting there going, are you freaking kidding me? We're not going to talk about this. But finally, he addressed the issue that the Affordable Care Act was supposed to address in the first place, and that was lack of competition in the marketplace, when he said that we're going to allow insurance to be sold across state lines. Thank you. Finally.
And this is a real problem, primarily because of something else that he pointed out in the speech, and that's that in many counties, especially rural counties in this country, and by the way, that's most of the counties, although it's not most of the population in this country is rural, that if the population has any options at all, they only have one. That's a prescription, as we all know, for no competition, which means high prices.
Right, and last I checked, one equals a monopoly. And that was the whole thing the Affordable Care Act was supposed to get rid of, was monopolies in the marketplace. Well, it exacerbated the problem.
Immigration is the first issue that I'm going to touch on, primarily because he hit it 3 different times in 3 different places in his speech.
It was interesting, yeah.
And that's if you don't count the 2 times that he referenced people in the audience who had suffered at the hands of criminal illegal aliens. So that would be 5 if you count those. But specifically,
correct,
the part of immigration that I liked that he mentioned is that we have spent literally, through our American military, billions of dollars protecting the borders of other nations. Yet we're not willing to protect our own borders. All right, go ahead. What's your next issue?
It's something that needs to happen, and it's more than just tax cuts, but it's wide-reaching tax reform. The tax code hasn't been reformed since the 80s, since Reagan was president, and we've got a tax code numbering in tens of thousands of pages that I literally have had two different IRS agents. I've heard this said in the media, but I've had two personally tell me, don't ask me, I can't explain it to you. Well, that's a problem. And so it's good that we're finally going to have that across the board, tax cuts from the middle class on up, and also something that should be interesting to both you and I, not only just a personal level, but the corporate income tax getting reduced. The goal is 15% from 33%. We'll see. But the point that's given, the counterpoint that's given by the Democrats, and not just Democrats, but people opposed to the tax cuts is, well, 33% is not the highest rate in the world. That's true. But then you add in capital gains tax, excise taxes, and the fact is most corporations, especially that do trade not just in America, they end up paying at least 50% of their income in taxes.
I thought that it was interesting that he mentioned that at all, because in the budget deal that they're discussing every 5 days a week with in Paul Ryan's office, the Trump team has gotten to a point where they've sort of conceded that if we're going to take care of the Affordable Care Act and illegal immigration in this fiscal year, then really we're going to have to wait to work on the tax code next year. So that'll be my point that I'll make when I'm taking my turn here, is that I was surprised he mentioned that at all, since it'll be at least a year and another State of the Union address until we actually address that. So what's your next issue?
Well, a little bit of a caveat there. It's going to be interesting to see which of these, because obviously everything is not priority one or else nothing is. Okay, so everything that was mentioned on the top of the docket can't be. But this is an anonymous source. I promise you and our audience they do exist. I simply can't name her, or else she's not going to tell me anymore. But a lawyer who works for a law firm that represents Paul Ryan's interests, the Speaker's interests, has given me a good authority. The two things guaranteed to be pushed through this year, and that may be changed for tonight. I'm going to talk to her again tonight or tomorrow, say she responds. But the two things that she guaranteed were going to be on the docket this year: massive tax reform and financial regulatory reform, and possibly repeal and replace the Affordable Care Act. But again, we'll see what sort of divergence each cause, which I admit is a possibility. The other issue I would point out here that kind of ties into all that is, I'm socially rather liberal, but I'm a fiscal hawk, okay? And getting this national debt situation under control, which there's a number of reasons why it needs to happen, and it's the most widely misunderstood issue possibly in American economics. But the balanced budget is a big issue, and it's going to be interesting to see how they pull it off with all these new programs that sound great. Well, how is it going to happen without deficit spending too? It's going to be interesting.
Let me move on to something that I thought was really interesting. He mentioned bipartisanship, and when I say mentioned, he didn't just give lip service, like he specifically took a paragraph to talk about it in five different issues. And all 5 times he held out his hand to Nancy Pelosi. And I know you watched the speech.
Yes.
Do you think that he was overly confrontational, not confrontational enough? Did it seem like he was pointing to her like, ha, you're not doing your job? Or do you think it was more of a, I'm holding out a hand of friendship?
For once, yes. For once. And I'm someone that, you and I've talked about this a number of times. I've looked into his body language, his tone. For once, and since he's become president, I agree with the Fox News panel tonight and the San Francisco Chronicles panel that he appeared presidential tonight, and this to me came off like a genuine olive branch. Okay, if it wasn't, he did an Oscar-worthy job tonight, but it didn't come off as, hey, sorry, loser, but we're going to have to work together, because he certainly had the ability to come off snide before. This appeared to me to be, hey, I get it, we've all gone through the mud here, but I would like for the good of the people for us to work together. It may be as close to that as they're going to get.
That's a discussion of style, but I wanted to point it out. And here's one on substance. He talked about trade a lot. He talked about tax policy, corporate specifically, a lot. But the little nugget that I want to pull out for our listeners when it comes to trade, he mentioned having the Harley-Davidson Motor Company bring 5 of their new models to the front lawn of the White House, and he that got some chuckles and some applause.
Right.
Especially when he pointed out that they're all made in America.
He didn't want to ride on one.
Yeah, they asked him if he wanted to ride on one, and he said that no, thank you.
I'm good. No, that was funny.
Yeah, but the reason I bring that little anecdote up is because it touched on one aspect of trade that seemed very personal to him when he asked the Harley-Davidson Motor Company executives, how are your sales? And they said, oh, we're doing pretty good. And he said, well, how are your sales overseas? And they looked at him like he was crazy. Because they said, frankly, we're not even really complaining. We've gotten used to it. They're taxed in one country, according to the executives. Their motorcycles are taxed at 100%.
Right, I'm interested to know which country he was referring to. I'll find that out as our resident, economic wonk. But that is an interesting point, and it's striking to me. It's a nonpartisan panel from Reuters that made this remark. And you've got to remember they're a British wire service, so they don't have a dog in the fight. But they made the assessment that based on what's been proposed, the rhetoric, and again, none of it's happening by going through Congress yet, but they made the assertion that this is the most pro-business administration, possibly, since the Founding Fathers. That generation died out. That's a strong statement, and it's small wonder if that really is the case. It's small wonder that these business people are going, what is this dude talking about?
Okay, well, it's your turn.
I think 200 years.
I think I actually skipped you once, so go ahead. Give me your next point.
Well, I think I've covered 3 different things here, but I would just say, before we head towards both giving our final wrap-up or however you want to do this, but I think it's something I would like for people to take away from this and from any speech any politician gives is that, remember, sometimes it's important to distinguish between the message and the messenger, okay? And I get it, not everyone likes his acerbic style. He can be very caustic at times. I understand that. But based on what the man's speech was tonight and looking at the executive orders, which I'm going through and dissecting in very simple layman's how does this affect you type terms, I would like for us to give the man a chance based on what he does. We all in Western society agree with the adage, one way or the other, how the actions speak louder than words. Okay. Well, based on the man's actions, I would like us to judge him that way henceforth.
I have the same exact perception. I loved how many times he mentioned doing something. We have to do something.
Correct.
Action.
Yeah, he mentioned hollow promises in the past. And yes, that's the biggest reason he won is the American people are sick of it.
All right, well, I'm gonna hit a couple more real quick because we have a few more minutes.
By all means.
Again, on immigration, another way that he approached this is he mentioned countries like Australia and Canada who have a merit-based immigration policy. And really quickly to explain that to our listeners, what that means is not only you have to be a good person to get in this country, but more importantly, for businesses who are unable to find a computer programmer or a scientist in their area or in another state who's willing to move to work in this factory or for this corporation or this engineering firm, that immigrants, immigrants who wish to come to this country, who can provide that service, that needed service for that Microsoft or for that Lockheed Martin, that they be moved to the front of the line and allowed to move to this country because they provide such critical services.
Right. The only people that it doesn't make sense to are people pandering for votes, okay? That's a different discussion for a different time, obviously, but it makes more sense than going with the status quo. And it's been said 100 times over, 100 different ways, but the definition of insanity being repeating the same process by which you've gotten negative results. Well, clearly the status quo is working for nobody, and nobody's talking about it. And I've gone through the executive orders, and like I said, I'm going to finish that synopsis soon. I'm doing 5 and 6 in the next 24 hours. But nothing has been said or done to date about, well, we're just going to ban these people, we're going to punish them. That hasn't happened. What the president has said is, hey, you know all these things, and he cites specific passages from the U.S. Code, the federal law. Hey, you know all these things we have in the books? Well, guess what? We're going to enforce it. Imagine that, chief law enforcement officer of the land wanting to enforce the law.
Well, okay, this is going to be my final issue before we wrap up. And this is one, again, I'm going to go back to style over substance. There's a place in the speech where he mentions some famous inventors. Remington inventing the typewriter, Edison, the automatic telegraph. But he left out, he mentioned Alexander Bell and, the telephone. But he left out one of the most important recent inventors. I don't know why in the world Al Gore didn't get credit for the internet.
To me, it's a blight. It's a real blight upon the speech. And aluminum foil. I think Al Gore invented aluminum foil.
Well, the other style issue, before we move on, is, and this is just as someone who's given speeches before, I didn't like how he gave 3 different endings. It's almost like he had 3 different speechwriters he was working with, and I think you'd agree he wrote most of this speech.
But it seems like something he would write.
He did this is our vision, this is our mission, we can only get there together, we are one people. He did all that. But then he gave us another paragraph and then gave us the time for small thinking is over, just need the courage, bravery, the confidence, then gave us 2 more paragraphs, and then believe in yourselves, believe in your future, and believe once more in America. So again, do you think that was a competition between speechwriters that were influencing him, or you think that he's just not really good at wrapping up?
Well, it's difficult to say. It's a good question. I do find it interesting for someone who, from borrowing the phrase "the great silent majority" to giving a law and order inauguration address, for someone who is so thoroughly channels President Nixon, tonight sure came off a lot like President Reagan. And I couldn't help but think that when he referenced believe in America again, because Reagan came along in 1980 on the heels of someone whose answer to a national energy crisis was to don a cardigan and tell Americans to consume less. It's like, get out of here, Jimmy. So it was interesting to see someone oscillate between those 2 voices, and somehow it suited him. I'm not really sure. I didn't notice that. And maybe this is based on the fact that I was a less accomplished speaker than you were in high school. But I didn't notice quite that same divergence. I felt like it was kind of typical Trump that, yeah, I'm ready to end, but this is the first time I've done this. I'm excited. There was some ad-libbing in there. And I think he wanted to get across, hey, this is a message for everybody. I'm not just talking to my base. I mean, tonight, he clearly was not addressing solely his base. It was
you and I both firmly agree on that. Okay, again, I get to finish, so you go first. Quick wrap up.
Well, the quick wrap up here for me is that, again, harkening back to what I said earlier, I'm giving the man a chance because, again, he's someone that I did not support at any stage of the nomination process. Not to mean I was against him. It's just he wasn't my particular dog in the fight, if you will. We all have preferences that don't make it. In 2008, I wanted Giuliani, and this go around, I wanted Senator Rubio. But didn't work out that way. That said, he is the president of the United States for all of us, whether we like it or not. This not my president state business. Well, I hate to break it to you, but unless you move, which by all means, but he is your president.
Amen.
Okay, so I would like for us to separate position from personality and give him the respect of the office, as I did countless times in the military defending President Obama, is he was our commander-in-chief, whether we liked it or not, and he deserves that respect. So I'd like us to give the man an opportunity to fail at least. I mean, he hasn't been in office 100 months yet, and the same people that didn't want to hear about Uranium One investing in the Clinton Foundation now all of a sudden want to talk about improprieties pertaining to somebody's possible relationship with Russia. I find that interesting. So let's give the man a chance to fail or not. And who knows? Maybe a messenger we don't really like might bring in the mail some really good things for the American people if we follow up on all this.
Well, as usual, you have wrapped up in a way that would be very similar to the way I would wrap up. So I'll do something a little different. I'll just go pro-con. Pro, he stayed on message. Pro, he looked presidential. Pro, he did it his way, but still performed well, was very emotional when it came to the officer that was slain, whose mother was in the crowd, who was also very emotional. Con, he stayed on message. In other words, he didn't say much we haven't heard. Con, he didn't really give us a lot of specifics, and I think that's a shame because I know from reading a New York Times article, which I normally don't trust, that his economic team, at least, has come up with some very specific plans.
Was this the place for a specific revelation?
Perhaps not. Again, I'm giving you my impression.
Right. I'm not being combative here. I was just throwing the question out there.
And finally, Con, bad on you, Democrats, for showing up in protest garb, booing and thumbs downing. I've never seen such an active protest in a speech by a president in the joint sessions of Congress, State of the Union or not.
Well, the only comparison, and this is again me not being combative at all. I just, in the interest of full disclosure and fairness here, the only time recently that I remember something like that going on, and I forget the congressman's name, the representative's name, that during one of President Obama's speeches to the Joint Congress, yelled out, "You lie,"
and had to apologize.
Very unprofessional, and he did apologize. It was out of order, absolutely. But something interesting tonight, if Hillary Clinton had won, and she was talking about using programs to encourage young girls to go into things like IT, or I forget the specific part, of what he wanted to encourage young girls to do. And if she had talked about the suffering of families who had lost people killed by illegal immigrants, I mean, there was a groaning and an almost booing of that sentiment by the president. I don't know that it would have been the same way if Barack Obama or Hillary Clinton had expressed those points. I'm going, wait a minute. Whose side are you on here? If you're booing about mentioning victims that were killed by people that didn't belong in this country, we're not talking about all immigrants. We're talking about thugs that shouldn't have been here.
Excellent
You're
point.
Boo that?
Excellent point for us to finish on. Again, this has been the...
And by the way, it is February 28th. I know you didn't mean to say January 28th, but...
I'm normally a day late and a dollar short. Tonight I was a month behind. So, for the record, this is February 28th. I trust when it gets published that will be correctly reflected on the website.
I might wait till March 28th.
So, this has been Gabe Coker, the host of the Political Beast podcast with Jonathan Deviney. Jonathan, thank you as always.
Thanks. Love you, man.
All right. And again, February 28th, not January. Bye-bye.